Je jembo zordan hingmi jang zoner monam jembo ngam gyata bagar darngon santo shirmaldo stomba to je janla ki jon zar ne jeror zerni jengam so jahor tuji shandar yella jimen penzo jala soran de gontir toban power shinji lo.
The supreme, profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it, may we realize the Tathagata's meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings, let us all give rise to the unsurpassed bodhicitta. Next, we will continue our discussion on the Udāna Sūtra, also known as the essential collection of all Dharma's Sutra, or the chapter on causes and conditions, or the chapter of self-spoken. It has various different names, but this time we are using the name Udāna Sūtra. Udāna means self-declared or spoken by oneself in the classical Buddhist scriptural tradition. Right now we are discussing the chapter on impermanence. We are going through the chapter on impermanence a bit more slowly. Here sometimes I refer to some Tibetan commentaries, and I diligently try to convey their general meaning in Chinese. For those individuals who do not fully understand Tibetan, this might prove to be somewhat beneficial. At the same time, I also looked at some other valuable sources, including the ancient and profound Agama Sutras, as well as the Udāna Varga. Also, these concepts are also thoroughly explained in Chinese. In this way, perhaps a few Tibetans who also understand Chinese but may not have much time to read through many extensive materials, might also gain some benefit. So I refer to some additional sources, but time is a bit limited. Sometimes, even if there is enough time, I might not remember everything. But in any case, we are going through each verse in a bit more extensive detail. The primary purpose is that while thoroughly discussing the chapter on impermanence, everyone can truly understand the principle of the impermanence of all phenomena and develop genuine faith and understanding in it. If genuine faith and understanding arise, then in our brief and precious lives, we will also have no interest in committing any negative actions. We will definitely try every possible way to give rise within ourselves to states of mind that are beneficial for future lives. That is why the great masters of the past have always placed special emphasis on the practice of impermanence. Many people, precisely because deep within their own minds the view of impermanence arose, later in life he truly became a genuinely dedicated practitioner. So for all of us gathered here as well, on one hand we use Mandarin Chinese to understand the meaning of the Dharma, because nowadays Chinese is indeed a very important language with a very wide and extensive reach across the entire world. So by utilizing this universal language as a tool to learn, we may have opportunities in the future to translate and understand many other knowledge, which is also absolutely necessary. On the other hand, through our extensive and thorough studies, even though the time is very short, it is still possible to develop a profound sense of impermanence toward all phenomena. If we truly develop a sense of impermanence, we will certainly dedicate the entire rest of our lives to the Dharma and to practicing virtuous deeds. So this is extremely, extremely important and significant. Even though we may understand it very well in theory and feel that the teaching on impermanence may be more important than the high-sounding talks about Dzogchen or Mahamudra. Because without a solid understanding of impermanence, even if some people claim they have already realized Dzogchen, but because they lack genuine renunciation, in the end all their lofty views completely disappear without a trace. Such situations do occur. So, although these may seem like theoretical verses to us, when we carefully read each verse, there is nothing that cannot be explained, except perhaps for those who are just beginning as new students. Basically, for those who have studied and reflected for a few years regarding these words and phrases, I think there is nothing they do not understand. But in terms of actual meaning, even great Khenpos and Geshes may find it a bit difficult. We may be able to speak eloquently, but within our minds has the true meaning of verse. really truly arisen within our very being, that too is indeed a significant question mark. So this time, everyone is studying very diligently, and this is indeed necessary. These are the words of the Buddha. The Buddha's words have outer, inner, and secret meanings, as well as implied meanings and extended meanings. There are many, many layers of meaning. Just as it is explained in the commentary on the Adornment of the Middle Way, the Buddha's teachings are truly especially profound. Even a particularly simple sentence contains great depth and profound meaning within its structure. In our worldly life, whether it's some poetry or other types of verses, they may only have inner and outer meanings, and beyond that may not have deeper interpretations. Therefore, in the process of studying, everyone should pay attention to this and understand it as a truly, very especially excellent Dharma. Indeed, this Dharma is truly excellent. Yesterday, a Khenpo was also saying that this Dharma is still very extraordinary. In the future, if we want to teach this subject in the Tibetan language, it might be helpful for practitioners. So here, if we teach it in Tibetan in the future, some of the comparisons within can also be made. If we teach it in Chinese, that is also perfectly fine. But the essential prerequisite for this particular approach is that one must possess the authentic transmission and also understand the content within. Moreover, one must understand it quite thoroughly. Although I myself am learning and translating at the same time, there are indeed some things within that I don't fully understand, but I basically have a good grasp of it. So this time I am studying together with everyone. Now the verse we will discuss today is, "Those who have been born and those yet to be born, all will abandon their bodies and depart. The wise, knowing their extinction, abide in the Dharma and practice the pure path." In this world, whether it is those individuals who have already been born or those who have not yet been born but will be in the future, no matter what, all those who will be born in the future, no matter how long they may live in this world, in the end, following their own karma, they will all have to abandon their bodies and depart. This is the manifestation of impermanence. Ordinary people in the world, although they know about impermanence, they do not fully understand the profound importance of their own future lives and destinies, or that it is very important to practice virtuous deeds after death. They do not understand this principle. But as for the wise, those who truly possess wisdom, they understand that after a person dies, it is not the case that death is like a lamp going out. One will definitely depart, following the good and bad karma accumulated in previous lives. Therefore, they understand that our human body is always impermanent and destined for destruction. When it perishes, there is nothing that can be done. No one can stop it. But the key is, what should we do now? Abide in the Dharma. We must abide in the Buddha's teachings. First, always rely on a truly qualified spiritual teacher. Then diligently listen to and thoroughly study the profound Dharma. Let the teachings merge with your mind. This is called abiding in the Dharma. The mind should abide in the Dharma, but one's actions should follow the pure conduct of the brahmacharya. Ideally, one should be like ordained bhikshus and bhikshunis or novices. If that is not possible, then at the very least be a lay practitioner, an upasaka or upasika. If even that cannot be achieved, then at the very least take refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma. If the conditions for taking refuge in the Buddha and Dharma have not yet matured, then at least have some degree of faith. At the very least acknowledge the existence of past and future lives. This too is a relatively simple and fundamental form of pure conduct. Therefore, it is essential that one should diligently practice and cultivate this way. This is the literal meaning. As for its related story, when the Buddha was in Shravasti, the Buddha's maternal aunt, named Mahaprajapati, she was the great Bhikshuni Mahaprajapati, when she manifested parinirvana at the time of her passing, the Buddha himself personally came to the solemn site where her funeral rites were being performed. He then delivered a profound discourse about the principle of impermanence, the continuous cycle of arising and ceasing. At that moment, a laywoman then said, "Why is the Buddha not grieving? After all, she was your foster mother, who had lovingly nurtured and cared for you. Then, in order to completely dispel the view of permanence and to clearly emphasize the importance of future lives and their implications, the Buddha began to recite this verse. Therefore, our precious human life in its entirety, no matter how long we live, will ultimately be impermanent. But in the process of impermanence, some people may have practiced celibacy and purity since childhood and have always cultivated the true Dharma, living very virtuously. But some may not have had such opportunities. However, regardless of the circumstances, in the end, it is still important to practice virtuous deeds to fulfill one's life. This is very important. In the past, the King Ashoka, in the initial first half of his life, people referred to that period as the era of Black Ashoka because he committed all kinds of truly evil and wicked deeds. One could say he killed people like it was nothing and was extremely cruel. He was responsible for the deaths of countless individuals, particularly the people of Kalinga, whom he completely destroyed during his brutal campaign. In the end, the corpses were piled up like mountains, and the blood flowed like the sea, unimaginably vast. Later, when he once again visited the scene, he suddenly reflected on his past actions. He realized that every single corpse belonged to a family, that each one, for example, was a beloved child of their parents, or a husband to a wife, a father to children, and so on, just like what is happening now on the battlefield between Russia and Ukraine. According to historical records at the time, there were hundreds of thousands of casualties. Ashoka was extremely powerful, a formidable warrior. But after he was overwhelmed with deep regret, he began to take refuge in the Buddha. He sincerely repented for his actions. He built stupas everywhere, established Buddhist temples, and spread the true Dharma. This period is widely known as the era of the White Ashoka. From then on, all his subsequent actions were devoted to practicing virtuous deeds. So it's entirely possible that in the first half of our lives, we commit negative karma, perhaps having been butchers, prostitutes, or having taken lives. This includes many people living in cities today. Before taking refuge in Buddhism, they may have killed countless beings. Some have personally and directly committed acts of intentional killing. Some may not have done it themselves, but at the dining table they consume the very lives of countless innocent beings. But after truly understanding what to adopt and what to abandon, they begin to diligently practice virtuous deeds and actions. They themselves also save many sentient beings. So for us it is truly a great blessing. Last year, Khenpo said, "You shouldn't drink tea while giving teachings, otherwise it's not very appropriate." Then I asked, "Is it inappropriate according to scripture or logic? Please explain." But he provided neither scriptural sources nor logical reasoning. It was just his personal feeling that it wasn't very good, but I feel that it's actually quite nice. When everyone is a bit tired, it's good to relax a little. And when people actually see me drinking a comforting cup of tea, some of them often want to have some of their own too. Back when we were all together, while I was drinking my tea here, there was a young devout nun who would bring her very own cup like this every single day. Whenever I was drinking my tea, she would do precisely the same. Sometimes even after I finished, she would still be making gestures as if she was drinking. So, as I just mentioned, it's just like the differences during King Ashoka's time. Sometimes in a person's entire life, the very first half may not be so good, but the second half can turn out very well. And it's precisely for this reason. The Madhyama Agama also says, one should do good deeds, practice the pure life, for all who are born must die. So, as human beings, because human life is indeed short and very much limited, and we will inevitably face future lives at such times, we should do good deeds and practice the pure life. Some of us may not have ordained before, or before we studied Buddhism, we may have committed rather serious misdeeds, but later on we changed for the much, much better. This also happens. When some karmic results manifest, the first half of life may be just as described in the words of my perfect teacher as an especially good practitioner or monastic. But due to karmic consequences or various other reasons, one's later years in life may not be very successful. This also frequently happens. But no matter what the circumstances, we must understand, since we have already been born into this world, or for those sentient beings who have not yet been born, in the end, all must face death. When facing death, all other things, such as physical beauty and abundant wealth or great fame and so on, none of these can be taken with you. Only virtuous deeds will follow you. Therefore, the great masters of the past, indeed, when they eventually reached old age, many of their own personal affairs, which seemed to be virtuous, were actually ambiguous, and they gave up many such things. After letting go, they would settle in a quiet and peaceful place to practice. Nowadays, there are even some lay practitioners who, in their later years, genuinely wish to become monastics. However, in some urban temples, once you reach a certain age, you might find limitations. They most certainly won't accept you either, so there are indeed certain inherent difficulties. Therefore, if you truly wish to become a monastic, it is best to do so when your 5 senses are still relatively pure. It is also possible to ordain at that time. And this will also be explained in the following scriptures. But even if you do not become a monastic, you can still be a good practitioner. Of course, if karmic obstacles do not arise, many people can become practitioners. But when karmic obstacles do arise, even though you know your own habitual tendencies have already gained the upper hand, and when you try to fight against them, in the end you often fail. This also happens. But no matter what, as long as each person maintains right understanding and right mindfulness, that is already very good, better than not studying Buddhism at all, and much better than not understanding cause and effect. If you understand even a little, at the very least, in your conscious actions or within your thoughtful mind, you will inevitably have some fundamental concept of completely abandoning evil and diligently doing good. Next. Up next.
Gawam Tongjang Najir de Ngurtang Semdang Jarve Shivam Tongni no Tombip Soren Javi Tianpang Jikten Parvendo Dorpong Nire Gan Jikten Parven Dorpong Nire Gan.
Witnessing the suffering of old age and sickness, seeing people die as their consciousness departs, our teacher renounced his palace life, while ordinary people find it hard to give up their desires. Here, the main point being discussed is that the Buddha used his own experience as an example to teach about impermanence. It is said that the Buddha saw the natural process of aging, and he also witnessed the suffering caused by illness and ultimately death, and at the same time saw people passing away as their consciousness left their bodies. Here, leaving consciousness refers to the mind, the basis for habitual tendencies of the alaya vijnana, does not depart. However, it is the coarse consciousness of the human world that departs. At that point, body and mind are separated. The mind at the moment of death has already left. And finally, the person eventually dies. So, at that time, the Buddha clearly saw the suffering of illness and old age, as well as the pain of death. Afterwards, our revered teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha himself, gave up his home, which was like a restrictive prison, and also his own royal household. Thus, the Buddha made the decision to renounce the household life. After witnessing these situations, he himself left home and became a monk. For ordinary people, this is probably very difficult, extremely, extremely difficult. Because for ordinary beings it is extremely hard, indeed very hard and challenging, to distance themselves from deeply ingrained desires. Now, regarding this story, at that time, there was a Brahmin who attentively listened. The Buddha began to expound the profound Dharma, and he completely cut off all worldly desires. At that very moment he said, "Buddha, how do you say it? You say we must cut off desires." but I truly feel that this particular desire is quite endearing and charming. How could it possibly be something that you would really even want to cut off? When he asked this question, the Buddha began to use himself as an example, setting himself as a model. Then, with great solemnity, he recited this particular verse. So, this particular kind of view, including what some Westerners have articulated, was also mentioned some time ago. They believe that anger is a kind of courageous, brave, or even heroic mindset. And greed is often seen as a powerful wish to pursue a better and more prosperous life in the future. And for example, arrogance, they perceive it as a form of self-confidence. Jealousy is viewed as a kind of competitiveness. As for stinginess, they truly see it as a way to protect one's own wealth and body and so on. They have many such perspectives. We would say, for example, the 5 poisons. They consider these as 5 kinds of beneficial medicine, which are very meaningful for human life and overall well-being. So the worldly and the transcendent often have very different ways of interpreting things. Some young people, after encountering different teachers and growing up, his educational philosophy and direction can be completely different. This is also entirely and completely understandable given the circumstances. And within this, as everyone knows, in the Jataka tales of the Buddha, at that time Shakyamuni Buddha was actually the noble prince of the esteemed King Shuddhodana. He spent all his days inside the palace and rarely went out for excursions. He had no idea about what was happening in society. Moreover, at that time in India, it was customary that princes and crown princes were not allowed to go out freely. So there were many people guarding him. Later, on one occasion, in order to understand the various situations of the world, the prince wanted to go out, to travel outside. During his excursion, he discovered that the first thing he noticed was old people. Because inside the palace, almost everyone around him was young, all pleasant and beautiful people, and he had never seen anyone particularly old or frail. Then he saw some other people standing right there, their faces full of wrinkles, leaning on canes, their skin shriveled, looking especially pitiful. He asked the charioteer. Of course, this is how it appeared on the surface, but in the ultimate sense, the Buddha was not like this either. The Buddha asked the charioteer, "What is this called?" The charioteer replied, "This is called an old person." The Buddha asked, "Will I grow old?" The charioteer said, "You too will grow old." At that very moment, he profoundly understood the truth of aging. Then he went out for a second time. When he went out the second time, he saw some people whose bodies were completely out of balance, suffering greatly, struggling and turning over in their sick beds, experiencing profound discomfort and distress. At this point, he asked again, "What is happening here?" "This is called being sick." Then on the surface, the Buddha asked again, "Will I get sick too?" He replied, "You will also get sick." Perhaps the medical care in the Buddha's time was relatively good, so he had basically never been sick or anything like that. Then later on, he went out for a third time. When he went out the third time, he saw that some people had died, and after they died, they were carefully placed on a sturdy stretcher, then carried by numerous people, some of whom were clearly experiencing pain. And then they started pulling their hair and all sorts of things. There were also many such customs in India. At that time, he asked the charioteer again, "What are these people doing?" "This is called death." Then the Buddha asked again, "Will I die?" The charioteer replied, "You will also die." After this, having witnessed birth and death, some Buddhist scriptures only mention this point. Later, in some other scriptures, it is said that on the last outing, he saw some people practicing brahmacharya. Of course, at that time, there might not have been real monastics, since the Buddha had not yet attained enlightenment at that time, but they were practicing virtuous deeds. Later, when he asked again, they will attain liberation in the future. Because at that time there should have been worldly practices of meditative absorption. Later, the Buddha began to contemplate leaving home. After truly understanding the conditions of birth, aging, sickness, and death in the world, he left the royal palace and renounced the household life. He abandoned all his family, which was like a prison. So here, the commentary does not state it quite particularly explicitly, referring to our teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, but in the verse it is truly said like this. So at that time, the Buddha abandoned such a household life. But for ordinary people, whether it is attachment to form or to sickness, aging or death, even though these all appear right before your eyes, it is very difficult for ordinary people to truly realize them. Because ordinary people have many ingrained habitual tendencies, and these habits constantly obstruct their spiritual practice. It's as if there is always some kind of invisible barrier. They just can't seem to effectively get past it. Every time ordinary people try to practice virtuous deeds, adverse conditions or obstacles arise, it's always very difficult. Therefore, we need to have a certain mindset. It's truly very difficult to be like the Buddha himself. But as for the words of our predecessors, some great masters, their teachings can indeed be of great help to our own mind stream. It should also be mentioned in the Ekotara Agama Sutra that if one contemplates the thought of impermanence and widely cultivates the contemplation of impermanence, one can completely sever all attachment and craving for the three realms. If we consistently contemplate impermanence over a long period of time, for example through preaching, proclaiming, or if we explain impermanence to others, then there is a profound hope to eliminate attachment for the three realms of existence. This understanding also depends on our daily lives. When we look at anything, in fact, to be honest, it is also a metaphor for the truth of impermanence. Just as it is described in His Holiness Jigme Ponsok's Song of the Path of Impermanence for those with favorable conditions and whose positive karma are more mature, perhaps anything that happens to them each and every day is also a kind of profound impermanence for them. Many of us truly think this way in our hearts. We sincerely hope it is like this. But later, after many instances of impermanence occur, we should view these changes as a form of practice, rather than thinking that because of such changes we are very unlucky or particularly unsuccessful. Nowadays, many people in the world, because they lack the concept of impermanence in their minds, if they do not have the concept of impermanence, they think everything is permanent, that everything remains unchanged, and whatever they want will definitely come true. This is what they believe. Once their wishes are not fulfilled, they immediately start to blame others or become utterly dejected and disheartened. They experience a particular kind of distress. Actually, it's quite natural to feel troubled at such times. But truly wise and insightful people won't be so distressed, right? Look at the Buddha. Who among us can truly compare to him? Yet even those to whom he was most compassionate, like Mahaprajapati, when she manifested her passing, he did not appear to suffer greatly. So I see that many of us practitioners, sometimes whether it's the illnesses we encounter ourselves or things we experience personally, such as the death of a family member or the passing of close friends and relatives, or even when something happens to ourselves, like what is now called a very serious terminal illness, for example, late-stage cancer, we may have already been prepared for such things. This is impermanence. So for many practitioners, whether they end up imprisoned in the end, or even when they are completely unable to eat at all due to a serious illness, at such times they are already calm and confident in their hearts. To them, these things are already nothing more than perfectly normal occurrences. If we look at impermanence from this perspective, practitioners are the same. On the surface, it seems like we all talk about it. But when we truly encounter the nature of impermanence, we have to consider whether we can face this profound reality. This is also a very important matter. Next it says,
Yerpu shangsta shinda prala jig devshin lijiang nyever gwarvar yer tambar namji chundu tambar de mumcho jan to shitjang gaman yer. The royal chariot will eventually break down and the human body will inevitably grow old. The supreme Dharma is most exalted and truly profound. The wise do not grow old. This verse goes like this. The royal chariot refers to the king's carriage,
which was commonly used in ancient times. It was indeed the highest grade carriage, exclusively reserved for the king. Whether it was a traditional horse-drawn carriage or perhaps another sophisticated type of vehicle, it was unequivocally supposed to be protected with the absolute highest authority. Furthermore, it was made with the best quality materials available. Nowadays, some of the most influential top leaders in the world have their own highly specialized and dedicated bulletproof vehicles. For example, the President Trump's official armored car is estimated to cost between 10 and 15 million. Putin's car is said to be a bit less expensive than that. As for the Chinese leader's car, they haven't disclosed the price. When they're abroad, they also say it's domestically made. Because for many top leaders, the true value, intricate internal structural design, and advanced technological features of their official cars and planes are often not fully disclosed or understood by the public, are classified and not made public. But many prominent military experts, however, indeed, are constantly calculating these things on the sidelines. They especially try to estimate precisely how much Putin's car actually costs. They're calculating it every day. Recently, didn't Putin almost have yet another significant incident? Some time ago, there were also 100 drones, and he was almost assassinated again. This time, it also seemed like it was a close call. In the end, he escaped through a tunnel or something, but whether these stories are true or not is also unclear. So generally speaking, when it comes to kings, it was the same in ancient times, not just because of modern technology. Their vehicles are completely bulletproof and also shell-proof and can withstand all kinds of explosives. They're designed to prevent these threats. They use special technology in their design. So for a king, his car should be the best, the strongest, and the most dignified. But in the end, when impermanence comes, even this will be destroyed. In this world, perhaps, indeed, whether it's the grand palace or the luxurious vehicles, or even the advanced bulletproof vests he wears, nowadays there are many such instances, particularly last year with President Trump and various other prominent figures. Maybe there's no way to put bulletproof protection on ears like bulletproof earrings, right? In the end, boom, it happens right there. But at that time, he was still impressive. He even said, I want this and that. I think he's a bit, otherwise, if it were someone else, they might have started crying right away and said, it really hurts so very much right here. Things like this, what it truly means is, even things as incredibly hard as these will eventually break. So in the very end, this physical body is even more so. Here the Buddha also starts from, for example, the Buddha's body, which is so magnificent and adorned with perfect marks. But even that is more impermanent than a car. For any of us, no matter how you try to protect your body, in the end it will inevitably grow old. There's nothing more to say. But is there anyone in this world who doesn't age? Relatively speaking, the most enduring thing is actually the profound Dharma that has been passed down by the wise sages before us. Here, Dharma refers to the Dharmakaya, the truth body. This Dharmakaya is truly indestructible and everlasting, because we know that the great masters of the past, the profound Dharma they realized, the unconditioned Dharma, for any sage who comes later, when they come to realize it, it still will not be destroyed. After we die, such a state can be carried into future lives, and it becomes more and more apparent. Ultimately, the highest and most profound unconditioned Dharma manifests. Therefore, the truly wise do not grow old. A wise person who deeply understands this profound truth does not age. Just like the Guru Padmasambhava and the Vimalamitra, they have already realized the deepest, most profound nature of mind, the luminous and unconditioned Dharma. In this way, some have attained the immortal rainbow body accomplishment, while others, though they have discarded their impure physical bodies, ultimately they too do not abandon it. So this is a profound metaphor to clearly illustrate that the Dharma does not age, while the human body certainly does. This is the fundamental principle of the Dharma's eternal agelessness. From the perspective of Vajrayana, this is the most profound meaning. There is a captivating story. In the past, there was a queen consort named Chimanu. Once, she was riding in the king's royal chariot and felt it was especially magnificent and splendid. She herself was also particularly arrogant and finally came before the great Buddha himself. Then the Buddha recited this verse to her. He said, do not be arrogant, no matter how fine your chariot is. In the end, it too will be destroyed. So even in our world today, whether leaders or others, some people often become arrogant because of their cars. But in fact, a car is just a collection of more parts or of better quality, and there is really nothing to be arrogant about. However, for those who are especially attached to material possessions, even just riding a slightly better car can make them arrogant. There are indeed such people. There is another important explanation as well. At that particular time, the Buddha also said to the great King Prasenajit that illness, old age, and death are the things people dislike most in this entire world, and are also greatly disliked in the cycle of samsara. But if one does not attain true liberation from them, they are the worst things in the world. However, for Buddhas like the Tathagata and the Arhats, they have realized what could be called the most profound truth. At that point, they are no longer subject to aging and death. So if we talk about a king's chariot in the mundane world, although it may seem the most magnificent, in reality, it too will eventually age and perish. Also in sutras like the Chuyaojing Udāna Varga, for example, at that particular time, the Buddha indeed told the bhikkhus, perhaps it wasn't exactly like that, but when the Buddha was actually alive and truly present, he taught them Dharma, sharing his wisdom and insights. During his teaching, someone approached the Buddha and remarked, "Your venerable body now appears to be a bit more relaxed or perhaps somewhat loose, and it seems to be showing some signs of the process of aging." So at that particular time, he then asked, "Why exactly is this so?" He raised this question. Then the Buddha replied, "Even the royal chariot, the king's carriage, will inevitably be destroyed and fall into disrepair in the end. So the physical body of the Tathagata is certainly no exception to this fundamental law of impermanence and decay." Thus he recited this profound verse. By using the king's chariot as a metaphor, the Tathagata's body is also impermanent. So if we use the flesh of the saints as an analogy, it is also more reasonable. I remember back then, Khenpo Achong asked Nyosho Lungtok to leave and go to Dzogchen Monastery. When he went to Dzogchen Monastery, I think he was 23 or so. But at this particular time, he has already understood the true nature of the mind. But Nyosho Lungtok, many of us may already know the true and inherent nature of the mind. No need for study and contemplation. But their method wasn't like that. They let him. Now that you have truly recognized the nature of your mind, you can simply leave. After leaving, you should go to Dzogchen Monastery. I heard that Mipham Rinpoche was there, so he went there to receive teachings. In the first year, the Mipham Rinpoche didn't make it to that location. However, next year, he successfully went there. At that time, Nyosho Lungtok should have been about 23 years old or so. At that time, he didn't meet him at first. Although Mipham Rinpoche had arrived, people all said that he had already gone into retreat, so he still hadn't met him. A few months later, he finally got the chance to meet him. When they eventually met, he respectfully asked Mipham Rinpoche to provide him with profound teachings. When giving the teachings, Mipham Rinpoche also said, "Karma Wangpo has written to me several times, saying that I should give you some teachings, but now I am quite old. My eyesight is failing, and I am plagued by illness." Because in his later years, Mipham Rinpoche manifested that his eyesight was also failing. It was difficult for him to give you the teachings, but today I finished writing The Gateway to Knowledge, so the circumstances are auspicious. Therefore, I will give you a brief transmission. He read a portion at the beginning, then read another part in the middle, and although he did not personally transmit the entire text this time, as the author, if I give such permission, it means you have already received the transmission. Then Mipham Rinpoche gave him perhaps a portion from The Gateway to Knowledge and recited some of it to him. Other than that, there wasn't much transmission, but as I see it, if we calculate based on Nyosho Lungtok being approximately 22 years of age, it was most probably the year when the revered Mipham Rinpoche, when he met Mipham Rinpoche, it should have been actually the year 1902. And since Mipham Rinpoche passed away in 1912, then he was probably approximately 57 or about 56 years of age. Around 56 or 57 years old at that time, Mipham Rinpoche appeared and said, "I am old now. Now my eyes can't see anymore." So at that time, this is how it was manifested. That's why many great masters and eminent monks, when they reach their 60s or 70s, even His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok, when he was 60, as we've mentioned before, he was about 62 years old or so at that particular time, it appeared that he could no longer clearly see the words anymore. By the time he was 71, he basically couldn't read any text at all and had to rely on someone beside him to record audio in order to transmit the teachings. Looking at the biographies of many great masters and eminent monks, it's also the case that some appeared old in their 50s, some in their 60s, and some in their 70s. But in reality, reaching 80 years old, it's quite uncommon to still be teaching and spreading the Dharma at that age. I think for many of us as well, I've seen many people around me, when they reach 80, their ears can barely hear what other people around them are saying at all. Someone who used to be very remarkable, extremely intelligent and wise, after growing old, seems to hardly say anything at all. Because when people around are chatting, they can't understand and just sit there waiting. So for each of us, whether it's about our age or our future life, we shouldn't hold overly high expectations. Some people might reach the age of 60, and then some. Take Mipham Rinpoche, for example. He said that by his 50s he already felt old. His eyesight was failing and he couldn't teach the Dharma anymore, especially if you look at his biography. In his later years, he was basically always in retreat. He even said, originally I wanted to write more treatises for the teachings of the Nyingma school, to leave behind some standard treatises. But the merit of sentient beings is very shallow, and my illness and aging make it impossible for me to achieve this. So for many of us, we should also take a look at ourselves and see how old we are now. If you are, for example, 20 years old now, I think among us here, basically no one is 20. Probably there isn't anyone that young. If you are around 40, if you are 40, in another 20 years, which actually passes very quickly, you'll be over 60, and progressively your primary 5 senses will decline over time. Eventually you won't even be able to see. Little by little, that's how life goes. But if we practice well, we can only place our hopes in the next life. There's no other way. Just like it is said in the Avatamsaka Sutra, a truly wise person can observe and understand that all things are inherently impermanent. Here, things probably refers to the 3 realms. Generally speaking, if we interpret it literally, things means Dharma. In the recitation, it's Jebo. Whether it's the container world or the world of sentient beings, they only exist, and exist only within our deluded perceptions. So just like we discussed earlier about the entire 3 realms, the 3 realms are impermanent, like autumn clouds. All phenomena are impermanent, and so on. Many principles can be demonstrated this way. Our lives are indeed impermanent. In fact, a truly wise person understands that the true nature of the mind does not change. Just like the 3 realms are like dewdrops on grass, they are impermanent in an instant. But what is it that never changes? It is supreme liberation. The so-called supreme liberation is recognizing the nature of the mind. But if you recognize the nature of the mind, you may feel relying on Vajrayana teachings is extremely beneficial. So for everyone, you should first start with teachings on impermanence and establish a solid foundation within your mental continuum. Build a firm foundation. Then through Vajrayana practice, if you come to recognize your own mind, this may be the fastest method. It may also be the best method. At the same time, after you have recognized the nature of the mind, I think you should not be content with just that. You should continue to study further. I also hope that you all, because in Tibetan there is, for example, the biography of Khenpo Sodargye. As dedicated practitioners and earnest seekers of profound knowledge, it is essential that you thoroughly read the biography of the revered Khenpo Sodargye. It also contains prayers to the Guru and some profound experiences of receiving divine blessings. At the same time, after receiving some essential instructions on the true nature of mind, one should diligently keep seeking the profound Dharma, and the content includes the study of life, poetics, and poetry. Our minor and major 5 sciences, as well as the entire of, for example, when he was listening to some transmissions, Perhaps many of them were receiving transmissions, but we can't really say for sure that these great masters of the past had a lot of time. I once read about Karma Wangpo Tenzin Norbu, how many times he taught the Dharma to others in his lifetime. His biography is also worth reading. So sometimes if we have Chinese versions, we can read the biographies of wise ones in Chinese, because the biographies of previous masters serve as excellent role models for later disciples to learn from, and are also a significant way to study and practice. So everyone can take a look as well at how the great masters of the past conducted themselves. Although we may not necessarily become exactly like them, at the very least we can attain a small portion of their merit. Actually, one can, even if in the past one's practice was not very good, gradually, by relying on spiritual teachers and by relying on a good environment, a person can change, just like King Ashoka in the past, who once committed every kind of evil, then put down the butcher's knife and instantly became a Buddha. You could put it this way: many people were extremely bad in the past, but in the end, gradually, by relying on the guidance of spiritual teachers, they themselves had the opportunity to become good.
Gawa chodna lenzang ngan chodna merg sheparte yit gung wa zingda yang choti mumber jumber yer.
Aging, you are foolish and inferior. You commit ugly deeds. Even this beautiful body has been ruined by you. Here he personifies aging as an adversary and addresses it directly. You, aging, you're really terrible, all sorts of things. He treats aging as an object to scold. It's as if he's treating it like a bad person. You, aging, are so unreasonable. How is it unreasonable? First of all, aging, you are especially bad. You are foolish and inferior, both incredibly stupid and wicked. Because aging has actually done a lot of bad things to us. You are both stupid and wicked, especially bad. Secondly, aging, your actions are especially ugly because you turn all good things into bad ones. Everything you do is truly unspeakable beyond comprehension. It is completely ugly and utterly malicious in its very essence. Why? This beautiful and magnificent body, our wonderful, youthful and vibrant flower-like body, this dignified body, what have you turned it into? You have completely destroyed it, leaving nothing behind. Sometimes when we meet some of our friends, the person we used to see before was very dignified, very beautiful. But then, when we suddenly see them again, wow, aging has truly ruined them. There's not a single trace left of your former beautiful appearance. All of this is because of the relentless process of aging. Recently, hasn't the internet been talking about Jackie Chan? Jackie Chan used to be a great celebrity, right? I don't know, but lately many complain. They're saying, why have you become like this? I quietly think to myself, it's aging that's done this. It's not like he can help it. His hair has turned white and his face is wrinkled. A lot of people put Jackie Chan's old photos side by side with his current photos right now. But actually, it's not just him. If each of us put our own youthful photos next to our current ones, for example, there really wouldn't be anything worth comparing. Because when it comes to celebrities, in our mind, they are always perfect. That image seems like it should always stay the same, but in reality, that's just not the case. So nowadays, a lot of singers and celebrities, the thing they least want to hear is, I grew up watching your shows, or I grew up listening to your wonderful songs. They really do not like hearing that particular sentiment. Why is that the case? Because it means you've grown up and I've gotten old. It's like you're indirectly poking fun at them, saying, but in fact, that's really how it is. As a person grows older and older, whether it's growing up reading their books or like this afternoon, someone said the same thing to me. They said, I grew up reading your books. And I thought to myself, that's actually quite nice. It truly means I've gotten older, and so have they over the years. Actually, when it comes to growing up, we often talk about growing up as if it means becoming more and more mature. But in reality, growing up is just a word. In fact, it also means getting older and older, even for beings in the womb. Although we haven't given them this concept, the fetus doesn't have the concept of aging. But from the moment of birth, we start talking about aging. But in reality, it's also a gradual process, a step-by-step journey toward death. So here it describes aging as a person, or even as the worst kind of person. And then it says, you are the one who has destroyed us all. This is the story behind it.
When the Buddha was at the home of a craftsman, it was during the winter or some other season, and he was shading himself with an umbrella in the sunlight. At that time, a venerable Acharya respectfully said to the Buddha, "Oh, your once truly majestic and awe-inspiring body was indeed absolutely magnificent." What he truly meant was that now it seems the Buddha was also approaching his later years. Some scriptures say that the Buddha's physical body would never be destroyed and would not age. But in some other scriptures, for the sake of all sentient beings, to help them eliminate their attachment to the concept of permanence, he manifested the process of aging. Even in the movies about Buddha, this aspect is often depicted. When it comes to the Buddha's later years, he still appears to show signs of aging. At that time, the Buddha proceeded to recite this verse. It is also stated within the middle-length Udāna Sūtra that all things and phenomena in this world inherently tend toward the inevitable process of aging. This means that in our human world, actually, all phenomena are subject to the natural processes of aging and decay. Although it may seem to us that things are very, very solid and substantial, over an extended period of time, they will ultimately be destroyed. Some things we built ourselves in the past, including those at Larung and other places, even those buildings made of strong reinforced concrete. But eventually, a significant number of these entities are destroyed by a multitude of various causes and conditions. It will be the same in the future. The buildings we see now in big cities may look quite impressive, but in reality, none of them are truly reliable. Nowadays, many dedicated doctors provide comprehensive protection, including for some high-ranking government officials who consistently have access to the most advanced medical technology available and are meticulously cared for by the best doctors every day. But no matter how much protection they receive, their lives can be extended. But beyond that, there is nothing. So if each of us can truly understand the principle of impermanence, if we can really grasp it, we might even talk to ourselves and say, impermanence, you are truly merciless. You look in the mirror and think, I used to be fine before. Then, after some time passes, the wrinkles on your face just keep increasing. And even your teeth start to fail. The day before yesterday, I went somewhere, and in the morning, they gave me tsampa. There was a particularly hard piece of dry cheese in it. When I tried to bite into it, it was truly difficult, but I pretended that everything was perfectly fine in front of others. In the end, I just swallowed the entire hard cheese whole without chewing. In the past, my teeth had no problem at all. No matter how hard the cheese was, it wouldn't have been an issue. But now it really does seem difficult. But it's not appropriate to say this in front of others. I heard that during our monastery's annual offering this year, the dry cheese was also said to be quite hard. So when your teeth contact with the dried cheese, you might find it quite challenging to chew. Sometimes you realize when you were younger, hard foods were absolutely no problem at all. Many elderly people end up rolling it around in their mouths over and over again. Some spit it out, while others force themselves to swallow it. This can be a real challenge for them. So many signs of aging, we actually display them in our daily lives all the time. But for practitioners, this can also be seen as a good reminder.
Beijing Ganjireta, Nantara, Niganana Ga, the Tirgana, the Jambur, Gamar, the Ignorkin, Sarawati, Tanjir Chicanona, the Gabzi Hokatana, Ganjirkanana, Zakatana, the Jambas Ganandi to Gab, the Gizi, the Jambur.
There's a Tibetan word here that needs to be corrected. Even if one lives 100 years, in the end, the god of death will take you away. Whether through the natural process of old age, illness, or pain, or ultimately being defeated by death. Here it states, even if you were to live to be 100 years, a complete human lifespan of 100 years, no matter how many years you actually live, in the end, you will be taken away by the god of death. There are several situations in the process of being taken by the god of death. For some individuals, it's simply the natural process of aging, where their entire body gradually withers. Becoming more and more fragile, their overall appearance also becomes quite unattractive and less appealing. And some people die in this way. Then there are others who, although they haven't completely withered like a ripe melon falling to the ground, still develop some illnesses in the meantime. And these illnesses torment them continuously. Originally, they could have lived to 70 or 80, but when they reach 40s or 50s, because they're sick, you see, even Mipham Rinpoche appeared to be ill, and so did His Holiness. He also appeared to be sick. So even great masters and eminent monks who should have achieved a high level of realization are like this, let alone us ordinary people. So due to illness, even before they grow old, some young people are sick every day. I wonder if there are any like that among us here. Some people can leave their Dharma text behind every day, but they can't go a day without their medicine. Wherever they go, they carry a whole bunch of it with them. Tibetan medicine, Western medicine, Chinese medicine, all kinds. This is being sick, and in the end, there are those who die from illness. And then there are some individuals who die from various types of accidents. Here, die from accidents refers to not being old, not being sick, but suddenly dying in a tragic car accident or some unexpected death. We commonly call this an untimely death, not even having sufficient time to be sick. They themselves don't even have time to realize it. And then quite suddenly, they're just completely gone. Yesterday, when I was watching people playing in the fields back in my hometown, there was someone named Yixin Huan who was a bit older. In the afternoon, he was going around jovially joking and interacting with others. After finishing his meal, he suddenly collapsed. There wasn't enough time to save him, and he tragically passed away. Last time we held a costume exhibition, I also had the opportunity to see him there. He said, it was done so well. I'm so happy, so delighted. Who would have thought that just a few days later, he would leave this world? So sometimes we humans are just like that. Some people don't even have time to get sick. They just die suddenly. So the people residing here in this world also face all kinds of different and complex challenges and difficult situations. Even celestial beings, those divine entities, can't avoid it. Some of them also die. So even if someone lives to a full 100 years, various situations exist, but we all die in the end. There are several distinct ways in which death can occur. In one case, there was a prominent merchant leader at that time who lived a relatively long life, but eventually died from illness, Wanrochi. Some beggars reported this matter to the Buddha. Then the Buddha, in response to this incident, recited this verse where, and there are similar accounts. Some also say that it happened in Shravasti at a time when the Buddha was teaching Dharma. King Prasenajit's mother lived to be 120 years old, but then, one fateful night, she fell gravely ill. And after becoming severely sick, the doctors tried everything, but in the end, there was truly nothing more they could do. She eventually died. King Prasenajit went to see the Buddha. He was extremely saddened and said, "My mother has died." You see, if a mother lives to be 120 years old, most of us probably wouldn't feel especially sad. That is already considered a long life. Nowadays, if someone lives to be around 80 years old, it is considered to be a long life. So at that moment, he was feeling very sad and distressed. Then the Buddha told King Prasenajit, "Is there anyone in this world who is born and does not die?" He replied, "No, there isn't." "Then, if that's the case, your mother is no exception." Later, the king's virtuous roots were also very good. He began to understand some of the meaning. Then, in response to this matter, the Buddha also taught this Dharma. So what exactly is it that we should understand? For example, the chapter on impermanence has more than 40 detailed verses. It seems that every verse talks about impermanence. But in fact, each one truly has its own meaning. The other day, we taught about Confucius. The principles he spoke to each individual person were distinctly different. So, for each particular case, the emphasis is quite different. Sometimes, if we lack faith, we might think, this is also about impermanence, I've certainly seen it before, or that one is about the same, I've seen it too. This is a kind of wrong view, but in reality, it's not like that. The Buddha, at a certain place and time, taught this Dharma in front of a particular person. Although at the time it seemed like he was teaching a Dharma in one place for sentient beings in the future, in fact, there are quite a number of people for whom relying on this Dharma will be beneficial. Then, as for another verse, relying on this Dharma is beneficial for these sentient beings. Therefore, the Buddha taught according to the needs of the audience. He expounded the Dharma based on different levels of virtuous roots. And indeed, as mentioned here, for example, some people may live to be 100 years old, but in the end, they will also pass away. What are the ways in which they pass away? These are discussed here. Some die of old age, some individuals died of illnesses, and some indeed pass away quite suddenly from unexpected medical conditions. So we can think about this ourselves. Among the people present here, if you knew you would die of old age, you might also have some profound thoughts deep within your heart. If someone were to ask you, you only have 10 precious years left to live, what would you do? What would you choose to do now? If you were truly told that you had only 10 months left to live, what exactly would you then choose to do? If you had 10 days left to live, what would you do? If you had only 10 hours left to live, what would you choose to do with that precious time? If we keep pushing this line of questioning, and if we truly knew ourselves, perhaps aside from diligently practicing virtuous deeds, there would be absolutely nothing else to do. Just now, I saw a Tibetan person who was informed that the hospital could no longer save him. Consequently, he chose to visit several sacred temples and devoutly pay his respects, while also engaging in various virtuous and benevolent deeds. He actually looked like he was walking quite well. Then I asked him, "What are you thinking about now?" He said, "Nothing much at all, just simply trying to form more good connections with others." When a person reaches the very end, if they truly know it, they will probably choose to do things that benefit their future lives. Aside from that, perhaps there's a sense of helplessness, nothing can be done. But if someone ahead of time, especially when they're still relatively young, reflects upon and contemplates the nature of impermanence, then perhaps when so-called death actually comes for them, especially if it's death from a prolonged illness, we might have ample time to adequately prepare. If it's old age, there's also time to prepare. But if it's a sudden, unexpected death, then there's nothing that can be done. However, sometimes I think in the case of sudden death, perhaps at that moment as a practitioner, there's no time for visualization or other practices. But in terms of one's own feelings and suffering, if it's not an accidental or sudden death, maybe it's a bit better. There's no pain of dying, after all. The struggle at that moment, some people are bedridden with long-term illness, with no one around to properly take care of them, and no money for medical treatment either. Anyway, it's a long and difficult period of suffering. In such cases, life is worse than death, so leaving sooner isn't really a bad thing. That's why contemplating impermanence is very important for each of us. It really should be considered very important. In the past, there was a teaching within a spiritual practice method that stated, a father once asked his son, "Have you made any preparations for your eventual death?" The son replied, "I've never died before, so I truly don't know." Then the father, with a sigh, said, "As a practitioner, you have utterly failed. A true practitioner should have experienced death 100 times. Only then can their practice be truly considered successful. Your practice hasn't been successful at all." So the father was indeed very strict. Behind his very way of educating his son, he was telling him, you still need to prepare in advance as a practitioner. For example, a soldier who has never been to the battlefield but has gone through countless rigorous training sessions where he's told, this is the enemy, and then he starts to shoot and actively engage in the intense fight. When he actually encounters the enemy, whether it's firing or skillfully throwing dangerous explosives, he becomes skilled and proficient in many aspects. Our experience with death is similar. We can also make some preparations in advance, like, what if I die from an illness? What should I do? What if I have terminal cancer? What should I do? Nowadays, there are many successful liver and heart transplants being performed. But at such challenging times, those who truly and diligently practice seem not to suffer much from these difficult things. If you have no practice at all, you really suffer to death. But whether you suffer or not isn't the most truly important. The key is that while we are still alive, we should make some preparations for the next life and practice a bit of the Dharma. This is indeed very important. Human life is constantly passing away. Day and night bring utter destruction, accompanied by the suffering of birth and death, like fish being fried in hot water. Here it means that human lifespan is always slipping away moment by moment, inevitably leading to its conclusion. In all circumstances, this is always the case. It's not like it truly stops for a while, not at all, in fact. It flows continuously at all times and places. Human life is always passing away. Just like the cycle of day and night, within the continuous progression of day and night, Moment by moment, everything is being destroyed in a very short period of time. Even during the daytime, things are constantly being destroyed, and it's the same at night. Everything is destroyed extremely quickly. Moreover, within the cycle of samsara, we are accompanied by the suffering of birth and death. If we didn't experience much suffering and simply died when the time came, then it would be nothing. But in reality, as long as we remain in this cycle of samsara, not only is absolutely everything impermanent, but in terms of birth and death, we continually experience birth and death. Even here, birth itself is constantly changing, constantly aging, and then constantly approaching the suffering of death. This is like a fish being tormented in hot water, just as hot water torments it. It's extremely painful. At that time, on the banks of the Ganges, there was a disabled person, a fisherman, who put all those fish onto the hot sand on the beach and then tormented and harmed them. And they kept on struggling, still kept on suffering. And as for this person, he was laughing and chatting very happily on the side, looking extremely pleased with himself. After the Buddha, the enlightened one, deeply learned about this significant incident, he then spoke this profound verse, revealing his insights. So, things like this also, on one hand, profoundly show the inherent impermanence of all phenomena, and on the other hand, are especially foolish actions, demonstrating a profound lack of wisdom and foresight. But people are just like fish on hot sand. Our lifespan is diminishing day and night. There's also a story that the Buddha, in a certain place of practice, at that time, some of the Buddha's disciples were cultivating on the mountain. During the beautiful spring season, they went down to humbly beg for alms and sustenance. When they went out to beg for alms, the entire outside world was also full of life and vitality, with all things genuinely coming back to life. At that time, families were joyful and happy. Family members reunited. Everything was wonderful. Then, after they finished their summer retreat, when they went down in the autumn, the whole outside scene was of everything slowly withering away, and profound impermanence appeared everywhere. At this time, the households they had previously visited for alms, some of their young children had unfortunately died, some of the elderly had died, and some young people had died as well. They also found that many people were living in great suffering. After these monastics learned about this situation, they returned and respectfully told the Buddha. The Buddha also recited this profound verse, and there are also various different stories that are quite similar. So in this human world, we just don't truly notice it ourselves, but in reality, with each passing day, we are one day closer to the end of our lives. In our current tradition, it seems that in Tibetan areas, people have little concept of celebrating birthdays. Although now perhaps those young people, especially those born after the 1990s, generally have a bit more of a clear understanding about this. Some of the older generation, even if they sometimes have no choice but to attend some birthday celebrations, they don't really have this concept in their hearts. Actually, to speak truthfully, whether it's celebrating a birthday or the New Year in people's traditions, when people say, happy birthday to you, in reality, it's more like wishing you a painful birthday because you're getting a little bit closer to your inevitable death. For example, if a large yak is kept in a cold slaughterhouse and it's given 100 days to live, after one day passes, if you wish the yak a happy birthday, you're actually telling it that it's getting closer to death. So if the yak had awareness, it wouldn't necessarily feel happy about it. It might think, I'm one day closer to death. So deep down, it might not feel that way at all. But as for people's habits, many of them are indeed like this. It's just the reality we live in, I guess. There's no way around it. So in this world, there is a lot of impermanence, this kind of impermanence, and there is nothing that cannot be destroyed. As it says in the Mahavaipulya Sutra, the Vajra wind of impermanence can scatter Mount Sumeru. There is such a saying, isn't there? So this wind of impermanence, even something as solid as Mount Sumeru, will ultimately be completely destroyed by it. There is nothing that impermanence cannot topple, nothing that cannot be ruined. So once impermanence indeed arrives, whether it's your status, your beauty, your inherent power, everything you possess and hold dear, absolutely everything in your life is inherently impermanent. Sometimes we truly observe certain individuals, for example, during holidays and festive occasions, when they choose to wear their finest and most elaborate clothes, and their faces are beaming with joy, full of happiness. But in reality, in a very, very short time, actually, if the wind of impermanence blows, It could be just like a fragile piece of paper caught within a powerful tornado, being violently blown away to some unknown place. So, for us sentient beings existing in this world, what is the only unchanging principle? It is impermanence. There is nothing else. So, the arrogance of many people. Some individuals are arrogant because of their abundant youthful happiness, while others are arrogant because of their exceptionally lofty status. Furthermore, some are arrogant because of their remarkably dignified and beautiful appearance, or their considerable power and their influence, and so on and so forth. But arrogance, in fact, is meaningless. If we truly understand the nature of impermanence, then we recognize that in this world, everything is impermanent. Whether it is ourselves or others, everything without exception, it is all impermanent. If you understand impermanence, then indeed you could say you truly understand the ways of the world. Especially for people like us today, things may seem to be going well on the surface. We often say the elderly might die, that life is impermanent. But nowadays, among young people, and in fact some even die from overwork. This situation occurs repeatedly among young people, but comparatively speaking, the highest number of deaths are due to mental illness. Especially in Japan, every year, an especially significant number of young people tragically die from overwork. This is called Karoshi, or death from overwork. This kind of overwork isn't the same as physical labor, but rather it's mental exhaustion. There are always so many things weighing on their minds that they can't get through. Of course, some people experience this because of their jobs, because of work. So some people, because young people nowadays especially tend to love to eat various types of junk food. And it's a well-known fact that junk food really does contain a significant amount of preservatives. This is something that indeed, especially young people, truly need to be acutely aware of for their health and well-being. Some people, for example, when the weather is extremely hot or when they are especially exhausted and their bodies are overheated, at that very moment, they might eat some ice cream or drink some cold water. And this is indeed the most serious situation. As for why there are so many sudden deaths nowadays for many people, even with the most advanced medical technology available today, especially among young people, it remains a significant and persistent challenge. One reason is eating junk food, which can suddenly cause poisoning. Another is when their bodies are overheated, either from exertion or the weather, and they suddenly eat something cold or drink cold water. We also see this kind of situation in Tibet. The weather is so hot today. Let me have some cold water. And the colder, the better it is. Then they eagerly take refreshing drinks from the refrigerator and quickly gulp them down in big, satisfying mouthfuls, completely finishing everything. But this is actually very dangerous. So many significant health problems and various issues with aging. When it comes to death, there are indeed countless causes and conditions. Just as Nagarjuna Bodhisattva said, the causes of death are many, but the causes of life are few. Therefore, it is essential that we should always keep the profound concept of impermanence in our minds and reflections. When impermanence arises, we must also face it with great wisdom and careful consideration. All right, that's all for today's discussion.
Bandara Badma Sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye